I didn't think much about the intercom until it turned on by itself and said my name like it had been waiting for me to sit down first. Not a page. Not a beep. Not static. Just my name, clear, level, almost bored, coming from a speaker that wasn't supposed to work after business hours. I remember the exact second it happened because my hand was hovering over my coffee cup, and I stopped mid-reach like the sound had caught me by the wrist. I took the job because it was quiet, and because quiet was what I needed. I'd been between things for a few months, trying to avoid the kind of work that required smiling at strangers and pretending I wasn't tired. Overnight shifts were easy in that way. The world expected you to be a little detached at night. Nobody asked you how you were doing. They just assumed you were there for the hours. The posting came through a staffing agency I'd used once before. Overnight building attendant, it said. Municipal annex. Low activity. Basic monitoring. The pay was higher than the usual night desk work, and the listing was oddly firm about the schedule, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., no exceptions. I pictured myself in an empty lobby with a book, maybe a laptop, a few cameras to glance at now and then. A place where the worst problem would be a jammed printer or a delivery person who couldn't read a sign. During the onboarding call, the woman from the agency spoke in a clipped, efficient tone. She asked if I was comfortable working alone. If I could stay awake without wandering. If I could follow procedures exactly. It's an older building, she said. Some systems are finicky. What kind of systems? I asked. Door alarms. Lights. Intercom. She said it like she was listing office supplies. I asked why an intercom mattered on an overnight shift. There was a pause, small, but noticeable. It doesn't, she said. It's inactive after business hours. But it's there. You'll see it. That was the only time anyone mentioned it. The annex sat at the edge of a business park that had been slowly hollowed out by remote work and relocation. During the day the area was ordinary, asphalt, chain-link fences, trimmed shrubs that looked tired. At night it was a grid of dark buildings and streetlights that didn't reach the edges of the lots. The first night I showed up at 9:45, like they told me to. I parked under one of the few working lights and sat for a moment with my engine off, listening to the quiet settle. There were no other cars. No movement. Just the faint buzz of the streetlight above me and the distant, steady sound of highway traffic that made the silence feel staged. The front door was unlocked. That should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, it felt like confirmation that the job would be as uneventful as I wanted it to be. People forgot things. Buildings were careless. Nobody cared enough to lock a municipal annex in a dead business park. Inside, the lobby was larger than it needed to be, with high ceilings and sound-dampening panels that swallowed my footsteps. The place smelled like old carpet, paper dust, and the faint chemical sweetness of industrial cleaner. Everything had that slightly neglected look of public buildings that outlast their budgets. A desk faced the front windows. Behind it, two hallways ran left and right, each disappearing around a corner after a short stretch. The doors along them were closed, identical, each with a small frosted window and a metal handle that looked cold. On the desk sat a monitor, a landline phone, a ring binder, and the intercom panel mounted into the wall to my right. It was the kind of intercom you'd find in a school from decades ago, gray plastic, small speaker grill, a few labeled buttons, a faint yellowed strip where someone had once stuck tape. There was an all-call button, a hall button, and a smaller one labeled maint. I didn't touch it. I wasn't curious. It was just another piece of hardware in a building full of them. The binder had the usual procedural stuff. Fire exits. Power outage steps. A phone number for the on-call facilities supervisor. A checklist with boxes that needed a signature at the end of each shift. There was a single line about the intercom system inactive outside business hours. Do not attempt manual activation. It read more like a warning than an instruction. At 9:59, the overhead lights brightened slightly, as if something had switched the building into night mode. At 10 o'clock, my phone vibrated with an automated message from the staffing agency. Shift started. Reply yes to confirm on site. I replied yes. No one replied back. The first 2 hours were exactly what I expected. I walked the lobby once, checked the doors, glanced at the monitor, which only displayed the time and a blank login screen, and listened to the building settle. Pipes ticked. Ventilation cycled. A vending machine somewhere hummed with too much confidence. The silence between noises felt safe. At 11:12, the monitor clock was 2 minutes behind my phone. I tried to adjust it, but the setting menu was locked behind a password I didn't have. I shrugged and made a note in the log, because writing something down made me feel like I was doing the job. At 11:37, one of the hallway lights flickered. Just a brief flutter, like a weak eyelid. It came back and stayed steady. At 11:50, the landline rang. The ring was sharp and old-fashioned, the kind that feels out of place in a quiet room. I lifted the receiver without thinking. There was no voice. But there was sound. Not static, air. It felt like someone had called from another room and left the line open. I could hear a faint hum, maybe machinery, maybe an office fan, and something like the distant clink of metal. I said hello once. Then again, louder. No response. I hung up. The phone didn't ring again. I told myself it had been a misdial or a glitch. Buildings had old systems. Old systems did weird things. The job was still quiet. The building was still empty. And then, just after midnight, I noticed how carefully the quiet was holding itself. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't just absence of noise. It was a quiet that felt maintained, like someone had adjusted it to a specific level. At 12:43, I heard a sound in the right hallway. Not a footstep. Not a door. A soft drag, like a chair being shifted across a floor and then lifted before it could scrape too long. I stood up and looked down the hall. It was empty. Every door was closed. The light was steady. I waited. Nothing else happened. I went back to the desk. A few minutes later, the intercom clicked. It was a small mechanical sound, like a relay engaging. The kind you might miss if you weren't already listening for something wrong. I looked at the panel. No lights. No buttons pressed. The building didn't change. I listened. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then, very quietly, I heard breathing through the speaker. Not loud enough to sound theatrical. Not ragged. Just steady, close breathing, like someone standing near a microphone without speaking. My throat tightened. I stared at the intercom panel like it was a face waiting to move. The breathing stopped. Silence. Then, so clearly I couldn't pretend it was interference, the intercom speaker said my name. Just my first name, in a calm male voice. Not distorted. Not muffled. Like someone speaking into a working system. I didn't answer. The intercom stayed live for a moment longer, as if it expected me to. Then it clicked off. My first thought was painfully reasonable: someone else was in the building. A maintenance worker. A late employee. Security. Someone who had access I didn't know about. My second thought was less reasonable but louder: someone had been listening long enough to know my name. I checked the binder for intercom procedures again. Nothing beyond the warning not to activate it. I checked the hallway doors, pulling gently on a few handles. Locked. The exterior doors were still locked from the inside. The lobby was intact. Nothing looked disturbed. I sat down again, trying to reset my breathing to normal. At 1:08, the intercom clicked on again. This time, the voice didn't use my name. "Don't move," it said. The tone wasn't aggressive. It wasn't panicked. It was the tone of someone giving a simple instruction to keep a situation contained. I didn't move. "Good," the voice said after a pause. "Stay at the desk." My pulse thumped hard in my ears. I could feel it in my palms. "Who is this?" I asked, and my own voice sounded too loud in the lobby. There was a silence long enough to make me feel foolish for speaking. Then the voice said, "You weren't supposed to answer the phone earlier." The intercom clicked off. I sat perfectly still for a long moment. I hadn't mentioned the phone call to anyone. There was no one on the line when it happened. There was no reason the intercom voice would know about it. Unless the systems were connected. Unless someone had been listening through one and watching through another. I stood up, walked behind the desk, and looked for cameras. There were two obvious ones in the lobby corners, small domes I hadn't noticed until I was actively searching. There was another at the hallway intersection, angled downward. If they were recording, someone could see me. Someone could have seen me answer the phone. But knowing my name still felt too personal. Like the building had introduced me. I pulled out my phone and texted the agency contact number, telling them the intercom had activated and someone was speaking through it. I asked if there was security on site or someone testing the system. The message showed delivered. No reply. At 1:31, the landline rang again. I stared at it. The intercom warning echoed in my mind, inactive after business hours. The phone rang 4 times. On the 5th ring, I watched the receiver lift slightly from its cradle, just enough to tilt, like an unseen hand had checked its weight and decided not to pick it up. It settled back into place. The ringing stopped. I sat down slowly, careful not to make sudden movements, as if I was in a room with someone I couldn't see and didn't want to provoke. At 2 o'clock, I heard footsteps in the left hallway. Slow, deliberate steps, not heavy enough to echo, but clear enough to count. They took 7 steps and stopped. Then, after a pause, another 7 steps, same pace, same spacing, like someone walking a measured path. I didn't investigate. I didn't even stand up. I watched the hallway entrance from the safety of my chair, feeling absurdly grateful for the distance between my desk and the corner where the hall bent out of sight. The footsteps stopped. The intercom clicked on. "You'll make it worse if you go looking," the voice said. My stomach dropped. "Are you in the building?" I asked. Another long pause. Then, softly, the voice said, "You are." The intercom clicked off again. I sat there, listening to my own breathing, feeling the building's quiet reassemble itself around me. By 2:30, my rational explanations were running out, but I kept trying to patch them together. Maybe this was a training exercise. Maybe they were testing if I'd leave my post. Maybe the agency had contracted with a security company and forgot to tell me. Maybe someone was using the intercom from a remote panel somewhere and being unprofessional. All of those explanations required one thing, that the person on the intercom was human. It felt safer to believe that. At 2:47, the intercom turned on without a click. It was already live. "I need you to write something down," the voice said. I didn't answer. "I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous," it said. "Just write." My hands were shaking. I picked up the pen anyway because staying frozen felt worse than doing something. "What?" I asked. There was a faint sound through the speaker, like paper being moved. "Open the logbook," the voice said. I opened it to the blank line where I'd been writing routine notes, time checks, light flicker, phone ring. "Right, I will stay until 6. My mouth went dry. "Why?" The voice didn't change. "Because you'll feel like leaving before then," it said. "And if you leave early, you'll have to come back." That sentence landed like a weight. I didn't write. The intercom stayed live, and for a moment I heard something that wasn't a voice, something like a low electrical hum, as if the system itself was swallowing air. Then the voice said, "You can choose not to. But you should understand, the rules don't protect you. They protect the routine." The intercom clicked off. Rules. No one had given me any rules beyond the binder checklist. But suddenly the entire shift felt like one long list of unspoken restrictions. Don't walk the halls, don't answer the phone, don't ask questions, don't try to understand. At 3:10, the lobby lights dimmed. Not off, just lower. The hall lights stayed the same. At 3:16, the monitor clock reset itself. It jumped forward by 7 minutes without explanation. At 3:22, the intercom clicked on again. "You're tired," the voice said. "That's normal." I didn't respond. "You're doing what most people do," it continued. "You're pretending you're still alone." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, an embarrassed kind of panic. "Who are you?" I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. The voice paused, like it was deciding how much to give. "I'm the reason there's an intercom at a desk no one uses," it said. The intercom clicked off. That was the moment the fear changed shape. Up until then, I'd been scared of a person hidden in a building. A prankster. A creep. Someone with access. After that, I was scared of the idea that the building had its own schedule, its own reasons, and I had stepped into them without being told. At 3:41, I heard a soft sound behind me, so quiet it barely qualified as sound. Like the air shifting as someone entered the lobby and stopped. I didn't turn around. My skin prickled with the certainty that if I turned, the lobby would still look empty. The cameras would still show nothing. And I would have to live with the feeling of being watched without proof. The intercom turned on. Very softly, the voice said, "Don't look." My hands tightened on the edge of the desk. "Why?" I whispered. There was a faint, almost amused exhale. "Because then it becomes real for you," the voice said. "And you don't get to unknow it." The intercom clicked off. The air behind me shifted again, and then, just as quietly, it left. At 5:30, the gray hint of morning showed through the front windows. The building's quiet loosened. The lights returned to full brightness. The lobby looked like an ordinary lobby again. At 6 o'clock, the automated agency message came through, "Shift ended. Reply yes to confirm departure." I didn't reply. I gathered my bag, left the logbook and signed, and walked out without looking down either hallway. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel like the road was trying to slide away. I slept badly. When I woke up, my phone had a new text from an unknown number. "Same time tonight." No punctuation. No name. I stared at it, feeling the same tired acceptance that had gotten me into the job in the first place. I needed the money. I needed the stability. I needed to pretend that fear could be filed away like paperwork. So I went back. The second night, the front door was locked. I stood outside for a moment, confused, and then the lock clicked. The door opened inward a few inches on its own, slow, like someone had released it remotely. I stepped inside. The lobby lights were on. The desk was exactly the same. The binder was exactly where I'd left it. The intercom panel looked harmless in the bright light, a dull piece of plastic that shouldn't have mattered. There was a fresh sheet of paper on the desk. Not a rule list. Just a single sentence, typed. "Do not answer the intercom." My throat tightened. At 10 o'clock, my phone vibrated. Shift started. "Reply yes to confirm on site." I didn't reply. I sat down anyway, because leaving would have felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to say out loud. The first hour was quiet. The building behaved. No ringing phone. No footsteps. No flickering lights. At 11:26, the intercom clicked on. I didn't answer. For a few seconds, there was nothing but a faint hiss of live audio. Then the voice said, "Good." That single word made my stomach turn. It wasn't pleased. It wasn't kind. It was the way someone speaks when a thing functions the way it's supposed to. "You saw the note," the voice continued. I stayed silent. "That note isn't for your safety," it said. "It's for your consistency." The intercom stayed live. I could hear the building's hum layered behind the voice now, like the intercom line was connected directly to the structure itself. "Last night you spoke," the voice said. "That's how people start breaking it." Breaking it. The word felt too big for an old municipal annex. At 12:04, the landline rang once. Just a single ring, sharp and abrupt, then silence. At 12:18, one of the hallway doors clicked, like a latch being tested and released. At 12:30, the intercom turned on again. "You want this to make sense," the voice said. I didn't answer, but my body betrayed me with a small nod, a reflexive agreement. "It doesn't," it said, as if it could see me. "Sense is what you bring to it. Not what it gives you." I felt anger spark through the fear. "Why are you doing this?" I asked before I could stop myself. There was a pause that felt almost patient. "I'm not doing it," the voice said. "You are. You came back." The intercom clicked off. I sat there for a long time, staring at the hallway entrances. The building remained quiet, but the quiet had changed. It wasn't empty. It was attentive. At 1:13, the intercom came back on. "There's a microphone in the west hallway," the voice said. "It hasn't been used in a while." I froze. The west hallway was the one that bent away from the lobby to the left, past a door labeled "Staff Only." I hadn't gone past the bend on my first night. I hadn't needed to. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and my voice sounded thin. The voice didn't argue. "That's what they say," it replied. "They." My skin prickled. How many people have done this job? The intercom stayed live, silent for a few seconds. "Enough," the voice said finally. "And they all think the same thing you're thinking." "What am I thinking?" I asked, immediately regretting it. "That if you can just figure out who's talking," the voice said, "you can turn it back into a normal problem." The intercom clicked off. The truth was, it wasn't just the voice that scared me. It was the way the building seemed to respond to timing. The intercom didn't turn on randomly. It chose moments when I was already tense, when my mind was already spiraling, when my focus was already on the hallways. It was as if something understood the rhythm of fear. At 2 o'clock, the lobby lights dimmed again. Not off. Just lower. Enough to soften the edges of the room. Enough to make the hallways look deeper. At 2:11, the low electrical hum in the walls became noticeable, something I hadn't heard on the first night. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even a sound so much as a pressure, like standing near a transformer. At 2:19, the intercom clicked on. "I don't want you to panic," the voice said. My hands clenched under the desk. "But this is when people usually decide," it continued. "Decide what?" I asked. The voice sounded almost sympathetic when it replied. "Whether they're going to stay a person," it said, "or become part of the system." The intercom clicked off. I sat frozen, trying to understand what that could mean without letting my brain fill in something supernatural. I refused to. I anchored myself to the practical, old wiring, remote access, a person somewhere with a microphone and a cruel hobby. But "system" wasn't a word you used when you meant prank. It wasn't a word you used if you wanted someone to laugh. At 2:42, the intercom turned on and stayed live. No voice. Just audio. In the silence, I heard something faint, like a second room's ambience bleeding into the line. A distant air vent. A soft mechanical ticking. Something that sounded like a chair shifting. Then, far beneath it, I heard my own breathing. Not from me, from the speaker. The intercom was picking up the lobby. It was live both ways. Which meant the person on the other end wasn't just talking. They were listening to me breathe. My throat tightened. I wanted to stand, to move away from the desk, to break the audio loop. But the typed note on the desk flashed in my mind, "Do not answer the intercom." As if the mistake wasn't speaking. As if the mistake was reacting. At 3:03, the voice returned. "You understand now," it said. I didn't answer, but my silence felt different. Less stubborn. More drained. "You think you're being monitored," the voice continued. "That's close enough. What do you want?" I whispered. The voice paused. "Presence," it said. The word was quiet, almost reverent, and it made my skin crawl. "You're here so the building isn't alone," the voice said. "And so it can listen through you." It said it like it was explaining a policy. Like this was the most ordinary arrangement in the world. I felt something inside me shift, not fear exactly. A kind of sick comprehension. As if the job had never been about security, and I'd been naive for thinking it was. The intercom clicked off. I sat in the dim lobby, listening to the low hum in the walls, and realized something worse than any single sentence: the building was calmer when I was quiet. The intercom voice got clearer when I stopped asking questions. The atmosphere steadied when I stayed still. It was training me. At 3:27, the hallway light nearest the west bend flickered twice. Not random. Almost like a signal. Then the intercom turned on. "Go to the microphone," the voice said. My hands trembled. My body felt heavy, like it didn't want to obey my mind. I stood up slowly. The hum in the walls softened, as if it was waiting. I took one step toward the west hallway. The hum stopped. Silence pressed in, sudden and deliberate. It felt like the building was holding its breath. I took another step. The intercom stayed silent. I reached the hallway entrance. The corridor was empty, lit by a strip of overhead lights that buzzed faintly. Halfway down, on the wall at shoulder height, was a small circular grill I hadn't noticed before, like a speaker, but smaller. A microphone, maybe. Or something that could be. The intercom clicked on behind me. "Closer," the voice said. I didn't move. "You don't have to touch it," the voice added. "Just stand where it can hear you." I stared at the grill, at the tiny dark holes, and felt the absurdity of fear in a public building at 3 in the morning. It was just hardware. Just a piece of wall. And yet my body reacted like it was a mouth. Why? I managed. The voice didn't answer directly. "People make it complicated," it said. "They think there's a person. They think there's a reason. They think if they can identify it, they can stop it." I swallowed. "Is there a person?" The voice paused. "Not the way you mean," it said. The intercom clicked off. The hum in the walls returned, soft, satisfied, like a machine returning to idle. That was the moment I understood what the intercom was doing, and why the note said not to answer. It wasn't a conversation. It was a test of responsiveness. Every time I reacted, I confirmed I could be guided. Every time I spoke, I proved I was engaged. Every time I tried to make sense of it, I gave it something to work with. The horror wasn't that something was in the building with me. The horror was that the building didn't need to be occupied to interact. It only needed me. I backed away from the hallway slowly, never turning my back on the grill, and returned to the desk. When I sat down, the intercom stayed quiet. The rest of the shift passed without another word. No phone rings. No footsteps. No flickering lights. Just that low, steady hum in the walls, like a satisfied animal sleeping. At 5:55, the lobby lights brightened back to normal. The hum faded. The building returned to its daytime neutrality. At 6 o'clock, my phone vibrated. Shift ended. Reply yes to confirm departure. I didn't. I didn't even pick up my bag right away. I sat there, staring at the intercom panel, waiting for it to turn on one last time and say something that would make it all feel human again. It didn't. I stood, walked out, and locked the door behind me without thinking. The lock clicked with a clean, final sound. Outside, the morning air felt too open. Too honest. I got in my car and drove away. A few blocks down the road, my phone buzzed with a new text from the unknown number. "You did better when you stopped talking." I pulled over in an empty lot and stared at the message until my vision blurred. I didn't go back the next night. Or the night after. The staffing agency called once and left a voicemail asking if I planned to continue the assignment. Their tone was neutral, like the only problem was scheduling. I didn't call back. A week later, I drove past the annex in daylight, trying to prove to myself it was just a building. The lot was empty. The windows were dark. The sign near the road had been removed, leaving only 2 rusted bolts in the concrete base. I checked online records later out of curiosity. The municipal directory no longer listed the annex as an active site. The address existed, but nothing was attached to it. Like someone had quietly deleted the building from the city's memory. For a while, I convinced myself I'd been the target of a cruel prank by someone with access to the intercom system. Someone who liked control. Someone who enjoyed turning a quiet job into a psychological trap. That explanation held, mostly, until the day I realized something about my own habits. I stopped answering my phone after midnight. Not intentionally. I just couldn't bring myself to. The sound of ringing at night made my skin tighten. If I missed a call, I'd stare at the screen for a long time before calling back in the morning, when the light made it feel safer. I started keeping my apartment quieter, too. Turning off the TV sooner. Wearing headphones instead of letting sound fill the room. I told myself I liked the silence. But the truth was, silence felt like a rule. It took me months to notice the worst change. When I was alone, truly alone, sometimes I would catch myself waiting for instructions. Not words, just the feeling that at any moment something might tell me what to do next, and it would feel normal to obey. One night, long after I'd forgotten the details but not the sensation, I was half asleep on my couch when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a system alert from an app I'd never installed. The message was short. Listening mode, on. I sat up fast, heart hammering, and checked my phone settings. The app wasn't there. The notification vanished as soon as I touched it, like it had never existed. I stared at the dark room around me, listening to the quiet, waiting for the intercom that wasn't in my apartment to click on. It didn't. But I still didn't breathe normally until morning. And even now, when a room goes too still, I catch myself thinking the same thing I thought in that lobby, in that dim light, with the hum in the walls steady and patient. That being alone doesn't mean being unheard.